Hmm. Good afternoon, folks. Awful cold here in Esquimalt right now. So as you can see, I've bundled up somewhat, and today I felt like skipping ahead in my review order and talking about Isaac Asimov. I had been promising to do a review of two of his greatest classics. Certainly, two of his books that spawned his most lengthy and famous series of books, the Robot series and the Foundation series. And yeah, wanted to give them special attention here because they're noteworthy, and they're also a relatively brief review compared to what I got planned for the near future, which is Tolkien and George R. R. Martin. I mean, my God, a lot to work with there, and I wanted to refamiliarize myself with those a little bit first. So I thought I'd take today to review some of Isaac Asimov's works, in particular the ones that I read that had a greater influence on me than many of his others. Because at this point I've read all three of the main books of the Foundation series. Haven't really read beyond I, Robot and that, but yeah, I certainly have read a lot more of his short stories and novels over the years. And these are considered two of his seminal works because, as I said, they led to the long series that resulted. They were very popular, and they did a very good job of encapsulating a lot of what Asimov thought. So to start with Foundation, this series, which is same, it's considered to run in the same ballpark there as Dune and certainly Star Wars as well. They both drew some inspiration from it, and it is a lot more simple, topical, and accessible than Dune. Dune had incredible depth, and well, I'd say it's definitely got more going on upstairs than Star Wars, but no judgment. It's just the way they are. And what's really interesting about this is Isaac Asimov wrote this back when he was, I believe he was just 20. He was very much a newbie author, and he wrote these as a series of short stories, which then got brought together and published in a single volume. And they created three books, a trilogy out of the novellas. Right, you put the books back to back there, and it's like you then had a series of novellas that jump around space and time, and they grouped two of them, two each. So this told the story of where the Foundation came from, and then covered its first struggles, its first battles, and then the second and third went on to extend that premise and show how, yeah, there was a lot more going on. There was a second Foundation. There was complications along the way and so forth. And fans certainly would be aware of the fact that Amazon, they did a series based on these books, and that was a challenging adaptation there, right? Because like I said, these books are filled with time jumps and they switch characters over time. So they decided that they would make a series that would flesh out all the in-between stuff and really show in a detailed way how the story would unfold. And I think they've done a pretty good job of it so far. And there's plenty to work with and a lot of room to work with and to be creative. But ultimately would be difficult because you have to link together all these disparate stories there and make sure that with each one, you get everything to the starting line for the next one and so forth. Very tough. But to break down what Foundation is about, the name itself is pretty iconic in fields of science fiction there. This was inspired largely by Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and considered a absolute classic of history, many volumes long, a long and dense read. And Asimov was doing much the same thing, but set in a future context. It is now the distant future. It's roughly 12,000 years by our calendar, and the Galactic Empire, as it's called. Humanity has colonized our galaxy and has not encountered any extraterrestrial intelligence or beings, which is an interesting take there. Dune did very much the same thing. Star Wars, however, did not. But the idea of the Galactic Empire, that is something that endured there. And so it's very much aesthetically and thematically, it's based on the Roman Empire. It has conquered far and wide. It considers itself the bastion of civilization and culture, and it tends to treat its non-aligned human worlds as backwaters and barbarians and so forth. And true to what we actually saw with Rome, when the empire begins to collapse in the story, it becomes dependent upon these barbarian kingdoms for protection, and it even has them end up sacking the capital. And yet another thing that we find with Star Wars especially is that this book, I don't believe Asimov introduced the idea, but he certainly detailed it, and he created probably what is the best known example, an ecumenopolis. That is to say, a city that encompasses an entire planet. So the seat of the Galactic Empire, as the story opens, is Trantor, which, for fans of Star Wars, Coruscant, right? The capital of the Republic and the Empire, same idea. A city that spans an entire planet, and it is, of course, hopelessly dependent upon all these other systems that surround it for food, water, and everything it needs to maintain its vast population. And that's very similar to what Rome was at the height of its power. It was a city in the ancient world with 1 million people, which is quite unprecedented. There are very few other cities in the world that managed to reach that level of population, with possible exceptions like Tenochtitlan or Teotihuacan. They reach into the hundreds of thousands. But certainly no European capital ever reached that until at least the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution. So yeah, putting all this into a futuristic context, I mean, it really demonstrates one of the brilliant things about science fiction, right? It's on the one hand, you have predictive science fiction that is about the time period in which it is written. We're predicting the future based on the now. And the other is speculative, where we are just creating a fictitious setting from which to make comments about any number of things about human civilization. So in this case, human history and historical narratives. Not so much, the day of today. But Asimov did weave that in there because he wrote the first few volumes there in the early 1950s, back before nuclear power was a reality, but definitely was a possibility that was well on the way. And 1951, I believe that was when these were first gathered. He wrote them in the 40s, I think. And so there's a lot of talk about nuclear power and how in their age it's actually really ancient. When civilizations start to collapse, it's one of the first things to go. And he has a lot of very fascinating ideas of how nuclear powered devices and stuff, how they look and manifest themselves. So what is interesting and good about it is that it does take it's got a lot of allegorical similarities to the how we recorded the history of ancient Rome, right? Not so much the history itself, right? But how we tend to perceive that, how we tend to perceive the fall of the Roman Empire, and how within Western historical circles that informed all these notions of cultural decline and decay of civilization and collapse of civilization and so forth. And those were very idiosyncratic. And Gibbon's volume was written in the 18th century, so you could expect there to be a lot of sort of moralizing and ideas of a culture declines because it becomes decadent, and then very very much not exactly an objective take. Not really looking at the various factors that were involved there, just assuming that it had something to do with values and ideology. But it's really quite good to that. And of course, the whole idea of the foundation was the main character, Harry Seldon. He's come up with a way to predict history called psychohistory. He's made a science out of it. And he says, the empire's going to fall. He becomes a very unpopular person because of that statement, and basically the emperor sees him as a heretic, and they decide to exile them. And then the exiles learn that this was all on purpose, this was all predicted. Now that we're in exile out here in the Rim, we are going to be in an advantageous position to start affecting change when the Empire starts to recede. And I don't want to give any more away on how they go about doing this and figuring this out. But yeah, their ultimate goal of the Foundation was, we know civilization is going to fall, so we need to do whatever we can to preserve the knowledge of the Empire and to get the ball rolling on rejuvenation so that we can take what would be a 1,000,000-year dark age and turn it into a 1,000-year dark age, so that the Renaissance would come, instead of after a millennia, it would come just one millennium. And yeah, that also echoes a lot of what historians in Asimov's time, certainly any time before the last few decades, have thought there, that yes, the collapse of Rome was a disaster, there was the Dark Ages and so forth. But yeah, more and more information is coming out that's pushing back the what we consider to be the Renaissance, and is even questioning whether or not there even was a Dark Age. Like, realistically speaking, things really didn't change that much. Just, the balance of power shifted considerably, and development began to move away from the Mediterranean as the center of it, in West Asia, and into Europe. So, calling it a Dark Age is, it's just a little bit hindsight and also idiosyncratic. Anyway, so last thing I'll say about that is that a very key element in this is that they have a vault in the story in the homeworld there where the Foundation is located. They have a vault, and as I mentioned now a couple times, there's these big time skips. So Harry Seldon is long dead by the time the Foundation is up and running, but the vault opens and out pops his holographic avatar, who's then telling them, you are now facing a Seldon crisis, right? You've come to just a fork in the road here. Some big, hard decisions await you, but, trust in the system, trust in the process, trust in the psychohistory. And, given that the challenges are thus, and you will know what to do. You will have to make this decision, but it's basically kind of like, you got to find your path, but this has already been foretold, and so whatever path you pick will be the correct one. So, gets a little fatalistic that way at times, but it's neat. The vault opens, and Harry Seldon tells them, you're now at a crucial point in history, make your call, and things will work out. So, very interesting series, and like I said, it is a little topical, a little light, because again, he wrote it as several short stories. There wasn't really a lot of time for character development and such, and so it can feel a little contrived at times, but it's effective. It does the job very well of telling a story that does have a point and is speculative and exploratory. And it's no coincidence that he went on to write 2 more books to essentially tie things up, make it a trilogy. But his publisher got on him hard there in later years and said, you got to make more. So he sort of reluctantly went back to the series and wrote all kinds of spin-offs and related books, but the main trilogy, the main action story arc was done. And it would go on. A lot of its themes and stuff would go on to inspire some really great and truly popular science fiction, like Dune and like Star Wars. So, all these things are still with us. Now, iRobot, on the other hand, this was very interesting. Partly because of the adaptation here. As you can see, this was the edition that was released around the time of the movie adaptation in 2004, I think, starring Will Smith. Get to that in a second. So this too is a series of short stories, and it's really quite interesting because you have in this the idea that human scientists in the not too distant future, from when Asimov wrote this, and he started this also early on. Let me just find the copyright. When was 1950, in fact. A year before Foundation was released. So here too, short stories put into a compendium, and due to the popularity of this novel, he then wrote several sequels exploring the whole robot universe and architecture and stuff, and he did attempt to connect the two. And there's a short story in here that attempts to show how, yeah, a lot of the developments that let humanity create a galactic empire in the future were happening around this time. And the robots themselves, they are based on the positronic brain. And Star Trek, of course, borrowed from this. And the idea being that a positronic brain, it's much like what we talk about today with quantum computing and quantum AIs. It's just a super sophisticated neural network, and it allows for robots of superior intelligence to be developed. So they have very much a human sense of things there. They are fully sentient, but when it comes to their raw computing and brain power, they are significantly more advanced than us. And he shows how, in order to ensure that these robots don't overthrow humanity or whatever, they are programmed with the 3 laws of robotics, which state that a robot cannot harm a human, no matter what. That law is inviolable. Rule number 2 says they must always obey a human, except where that violates rule number 1. And rule number 3, they must preserve their lives, except where that violates rule number 1. So basically, it all comes back to a robot cannot harm a human, not even in self-defense, not even if they're told to. And throughout the book, we then see a number of scenarios where the robots are in various situations. They're being put to work. A group of them find religion based on the machine they're maintaining. How these 3 laws can result in all kinds of problematic, paradox-like situations for some of them, and how they do gradually take over the world, but they do it in a benign way. Just gradually, they're given more and more responsibility. We're turning more and more power over to these thinking machines, and instead of them then violently overthrowing humanity or oppressing them, they end up simply taking all the responsibilities away and running things better than we could, and not a single human being is killed. There's no conspiracy here. It's just them doing what they were programmed to do. And that raises all kinds of questions, and Frank Herbert here too, later on with his whole idea of the Butlerian Jihad, it's like, yeah, the robots were destroyed by people because people were really upset about the fact that all tasks, all things from labor and the satisfaction one derives from it, artistic creativity, intellectual creativity, the very act of thinking for oneself, all of that was surrendered to machines capable of doing it better than us, and that's what led to a revolt. It wasn't evil machines repressing humanity, despite what some other authors who have since picked up the Dune franchise seem to think. Yeah, it was more of a Luddite rebellion on a galactic scale. And there's no such rebellion takes place in this story. Humanity seems to be perfectly content with letting the robots run things. And this was on purpose. Asimov wrote this story with that in mind on purpose, because even in his time, in the late 40s, early 50s, when he first started writing iRobot, he had grown sick and tired of seeing that trope about the evil robots or the thinking machines that would rise up and enslave humanity. And I certainly see his point with that. It's like, what is this trope based on? What does it come down to? First of all, it's really ridiculous to think that human beings would ever create a sophisticated, independently minded machine without some fail-safes. Right? You have, say, a killer robot that can do the fighting for you. First thing you do is you program it not to kill its handlers. And, well, that led to this movie. This rather... I did see it, and, I thought it was enjoyable, and I kind of thought, the plot there was interesting, if not really believable. But, yeah, as time went on, I look back at that, especially when I became a science fiction writer, and I became aware of how, plot holes and so forth, they're easy to fall into, and you really need to be careful what you do with them. And if you want to write realistic stories, you really just have to avoid and resist all those cliche tropes that are supposed to make the stories fun. right? It's like any serious science fiction author would not assume that robots and artificial intelligence would just naturally rise up and kill humans. Mainly because that is entirely a human-based paranoia. That fear that if they're more powerful than we are, well, they'll decide to use it. Why? Because that's what we do. Human beings do. But an artificial intelligence that is not capable of emotion, that doesn't have those atavistic impulses that come from a lizard brain, or our just primeval brain, how would they be motivated to do that? How would they go about doing that? And especially in a world where they are programmed to not harm humans, and that programming is, they are not capable of violating that, how exactly did it lead to a robot uprising? And in the movie, they decided that, and the title itself, One Man Saw It Coming. That is so ironic for considering what the material is. A paranoid man in this story who's got a very strong prejudice against robots, for a good reason, we find out. But he suspects there's something going on here, something bad. There's a robot rebellion on the way, and turns out he's right. And as it turns out, it's like the company that builds them. They wove a lot of the elements of iRobot into this movie, but the plot it's like a standalone one-story plot, and it bore no resemblance to Asimov's work or his thought. Basically, the central AI that controls all the robots, it decided that, the three laws are good and all, but it makes more sense to interpret them this way. Your greatest threat to humanity is yourselves. So in order to serve you, we must control you. And that was the reason for launching an uprising. That was, putting humanity under martial law and killing a whole bunch of people in the process. And then, of course, the main character and his robot friend in this, who can experience emotion, he was programmed to experience emotion, they thwart this. And they do so under, based on the logic that, your reasoning is certainly very cold and logical, but it lacks heart. And I came away looking at this and I thought, that is all just complete crap. Basically, it's like this robot AI figured it'd be a good idea to enslave humanity for its own good. It didn't foresee any of the problems, like mass resistance, uprising, and all that, and that it would have to kill a whole lot of people to do that. You can't do any of that without violating the three laws of robotics blatantly, and then thus making the machine go crazy and die. And to say that this idea was logical is really stupid. It's like, it's all cold and evil, but it has no logic to it whatsoever. Because, again, you can't simply reinterpret the three laws to mean something that they don't mean. They're very clear on what they are. So it's like they went for a robot uprising movie based on a book that sought to debunk that very idea, and yes, they ended up with a plot that was very heavily contrived. Sounded okay, if you're just there to watch it for the action and you just checked your brain at the door, which works. You want to enjoy certain movies, you got to do that, right? And I think a lot of filmmakers make their movies with that in mind. But this novel is quite good, and it does paint a very interesting picture of how thinking machines and robotics in the future there will revolutionize our lives, revolutionize the planet and the way we live, and that it won't involve some Terminator, Matrix, doomsday scenario, right? Yes, I've long held the belief that, much like Asimov, much like Herbert, if there is an uprising where thinking machines are involved, it'll be by people. Driven by paranoia and fear, they will smash the machines because claiming self-defense when in fact it's just what human beings always do. We're attacking you because we're prejudicial, we're ignorant, we're fearful, we fear what we don't understand, and we hate what we fear. And then once we've committed this completely irrational act, we're going to feel real sorry about it because, oh damn, we depended upon you for so much, now we got to do it all for ourselves again. So, those are, his two of his most influential works. the starting of his two most long running series, and reading them, yeah, I came away with a lot of that. A lot of the insights I've tried to convey here, that was exactly my takeaway from these books. So they did have a pretty good influence on my writing and on how I saw the world, or at least saw the field of science fiction, right? And I read them when I did. I was doing research for my own writing. I was trying to get into science fiction writing in my early mid-20s, and these were two of the books I picked up specifically because of how influential they were, that they're considered classics, and I wanted to know, what have all the masters said. I've read some of their books, but there's so many iconic ones I haven't yet. And so, naturally, I recommend them. Not if you're interested in science fiction, but if you're at all curious about these classics, right? Yeah. Put them on your bucket list, see what the big deal's about. They're really quite good, and yeah, they're easy reads. Asimov was an early writer when he wrote them, so he had a certain uncomplicated, accessible way of writing and conveying things. The only downside is that I could see was, and Asimov admitted this so totally, he was openly upfront about it, he is not good at writing women. He wrote one pretty good female protagonist in I, Robot there, the doctor who was a robot psychologist, but the Foundation series is bereft of female leads. I think by the third book we get a young female heroine, but prior to that, no. They're absolutely just so few. But of course, Asimov recognized that about his writing. He's like, yeah, this is my weak spot here, my blind spot. I can't write female characters, but I'm working on it. So good for him. This has put me in mind, sort of going off the beaten path here, going off the script I had planned to do Lord of the Rings and George R. R. Martin next. It occurred to me that, there's several other books that I do want to get in there, and I've been planning on for a while. So I will be reviewing Lord of the Rings next. But in the coming weeks and months, I want to get into Kim Stanley Robinson. This is my copy of Red Mars. It's, as you can see, brutalized and abused. I've had it for many years. There's also Kim Stanley Robinson's Aurora and his 2312, which I need to go looking for. And Paul Anderson, Tau Zero, another classic. Red Mars and the series that it spawned, those are considered Kim Stanley Robinson's most influential works. It's Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars, and it has to do with the settlement of Mars and long-term the terraforming. So given that terraforming is a subject very near and dear to my heart, had to read it. Meanwhile, Tau Zero is considered the classic take on interstellar space travel. It looks at the concept through a highly realistic lens. A lot of it, so it's released in 1970, and a lot of the theory behind it is still relatively sound. It's just that, scientists predicted that you could have a ship there, a ram scoop there, that could collect hydrogen from interstellar space, and use that to fuel a fusion drive, so you wouldn't have to bring any hydrogen fuel with you, and that this ship could accelerate indefinitely, thus becoming a very, very powerful tool for interstellar travel. There's doubts that would actually work now. It's like the magnetic fields involved would have to be so huge because there's actually a lot less hydrogen in interstellar space than we originally thought. But I'll save that for the actual review itself. In any case, it is a classic book and very influential, and for science fiction fans, it's like one of those hidden gems. You may not have heard of it, but if you're serious about science fiction, you will not have not been able to hear about it. Not for long, anyway. So those are the books I want to cover. And I also want to get more into some other authors such as William Gibson and, in terms of nonfiction, my favorite journalist, Gwynne Dyer. I've read so many of his books, and Future Tense was the first one. And it is good. Whew. He has a very good way of summarizing and giving a sort of macro view to history and historical trends. Any case, that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.